the 6th of October 1981. Egyptian President Anwar al-Sadat, at the peak of his powers, celebrating the anniversary of the 1973 war with Israel. With all eyes turned towards the military parade, suddenly shots were heard. The president had been assassinated. The vice president, Hosni Mubarak, who had been sitting shoulder to shoulder with Sadat, was quickly pulled out from the chaos and escaped unharmed. Sadat's sudden demise would prove to be a pivotal point in Mubarak's career. Just 8 days later, he was elected president.
The transfer of power from Sadat to Mubarak did not happen democratically. It happened in a bureaucratic way. It was an inheritance of power.
Having ruled Egypt for 27 years, President Mubarak is now 80 years old. During his long life, he has been a witness to momentous events, both politically and socially. Yet for many of his compatriots, things have stayed the same, and Egypt remains a nation in waiting. Egypt, a nation of nearly 80 million, is today the most populous Arab country and one of the world's most ancient civilizations. For thousands of years, its people have been living peacefully as farmers, eternally attached to their Nile and fertile valley. From the fall of its pharaonic civilization at the hands of Persian armies in 525 BC until the end of British occupation in the mid-20th century, Egypt had been continuously governed by foreigners. Throughout this period, the Egyptian people were completely depoliticized, denied a say in their own affairs for so long.
Historically, the Egyptian citizen, and especially the farmer, has made a hidden pact with the government. I won't bother you as long as my livelihood is secure.
And it was against this backdrop, on the 4th of May 1928, that Mohammed Hosni Mubarak was born to a modest family in a poor village in the Nile Delta. From these humble beginnings, he rose to become a highly decorated pilot in the Egyptian Air Force. Consumed by devotion to his military career, it seemed Mubarak had no time nor interest in politics. And he had no involvement in the military coup, later known as the Revolution of July 1952, which overthrew King Farouk. The leader of the Free Officers movement, which carried out the coup, became revered as the first true Egyptian ruler since the time of the pharaohs. The Egyptian people were yearning for a leader of their own, and the charismatic Jamal Abdel Nasser captured their hearts and their loyalty.
Societies have always created their own heroes. When there is a need, one of its people will rise and lead their country to victory.
With the new leader came a new political system. A republic was declared in 1953. All political parties were disbanded. Egypt was to be a one-party state, and Nasser's decisions were to be unopposed. As the Egyptians began to witness the liberation of their country from British occupation, and with signs of Arab unity on the horizon, respect for their new leader grew. Respect turned to adoration for the man who made it his priority to empower the powerless, the laborers and the peasants. Under Nasser, Egypt cast off its capitalist system that had been in place up until 1952.
In the 60s, Egypt went through a period of imposing ideas like the nationalization of private capital and developing an economic system which depended on state ownership of production, which is the socialist system, or to be more realistic, the communist system.
Egypt was looking left, not only for its economic policies, but also for military support. It was during this period that Hosni Mubarak was sent to the Soviet Union to learn how to pilot the new Tupolev bomber planes that Egypt had recently invested in. Mubarak's career prospered throughout the 50s and 60s as he rose to become commander of Egypt's bomber brigade. His dedication to military service was complete, and he expected his staff to display the same single-mindedness.
He wanted people to do their job properly. If they made a mistake, he would confront them straight away. And if they repeated it, they would be punished. He's a patient man, but also decisive and doesn't let emotion get in the way.
President Mubarak did not have any kind of political or cultural background. He even hated reading newspapers, and it's well known that he despised seeing his officers read.
The 60s were an optimistic period in Egypt, but Nasser's regime was about to face a major blow, one that would obliterate Mubarak's bomber brigade. On the morning of the 5th of June 1967, in the southern city of Luxor, Mubarak witnessed a devastating Israeli aerial attack. An attack which was to destroy his bombers on the ground. It was only the beginning of what was to be Egypt's biggest military defeat in modern history, the Six-Day War. After the war, focus was immediately directed towards rebuilding the Egyptian armed forces. Egypt had suffered enormous losses of men, equipment and land, including the entire Sinai Peninsula. The Egyptian armed forces set about changing the whole chain of command which bore responsibility for the defeat. Their replacements were to be drawn from among the most loyal and professional. Egypt's worst defeat was about to turn into one of the biggest opportunities in Mubarak's career.
We were ordered to increase the number of pilots, and President Mubarak was chosen to lead the Air Force Academy because he was known to be exceptionally dedicated and loyal to his work.
In March 1969, and on a sudden visit to the Air Force Academy, President Jamal Abdel Nasser shook Hosni Mubarak's hand and asked, "What are you doing here?" Mubarak was to realize that this question, which had filled him with fear, held a clue to a forthcoming promotion. Within a few months, he was appointed Chief of Staff of the Egyptian Air Force. Mubarak's main task was to rebuild his units, completely destroyed in 1967, and to lead them back into the fighting arena. This period in which skirmishes with Israel were escalating was later known as the War of Attrition. Egypt would not accept defeat, and it was crucial that its strongest troops were ready. But suddenly on the 28th of September 1970, and after 18 years in power, President Nasser died of a heart attack. His loss shocked the millions who had adored him. In what would become a familiar pattern, power was transferred smoothly from president to vice president without the involvement of the majority of the Egyptian people. It was now down to Anwar al-Sadat to prepare for the next round of hostilities with Israel. Under Sadat in 1972, Mubarak was again promoted, this time to the position of Commander of the Air Force. He was to become one of the key players in the planning of the coming war. This was a chance for his talents to shine.
He remembered the full names of every single person in the Air Force. He even knew who was going through personal problems and would secretly try to help them. This made our generation really love him. We were prepared to throw ourselves into the fire for him.
On the 6th of October 1973, Egypt launched an all-out war against Israel. Its aim was to recapture Sinai. The assault began with an aerial strike against Israeli targets. A few minutes later, Egyptian land forces crossed the Suez Canal. They collided with Israeli troops in the deserts of Sinai. Violent fighting ensued. Less than 3 weeks later, the war was over, with both sides claiming victory. In February 1974, Egypt was celebrating its achievements in the war, for it had managed to recapture part of the Sinai Peninsula.